The lights in the studio burned hot. This wasn't just another Sunday segment. The producers knew it. The audience knew it. And both men in the chairs center stage, Denzel Washington and Senator John Kennedy, knew it more than anyone. From the moment the red light blinked on, it was clear this wasn't going to be polite. Senator Kennedy, the moderator, began cautiously, "You recently said, and I quote, America needs to get back to the God of the Bible. You've also cited scripture in several of your policy speeches." The senator leaned forward, fingers steepled, trademark grin in place. "That's correct," he said smoothly. "I believe faith is the backbone of this country. Always has been." Then came the shift. Denzel didn't wait. He turned toward Kennedy, his tone measured, but sharp. "You quote the Bible," he said, "but do you live it?" The question dropped like a hammer. Kennedy chuckled, trying to brush it off. "Well, now, I don't claim to be perfect, Mr. Washington." Denzel didn't smile. "Perfection isn't the standard. Integrity is." The studio fell quiet. Even the crew behind the glass leaned in. "You stand on platforms," Denzel continued, "talking about forgiveness while backing policies that separate families. You cite Proverbs while slashing food aid. You want to talk about the Bible? Let's talk." Kennedy blinked. "Are you saying I'm a hypocrite?" "I'm saying," Denzel replied, voice calm but unrelenting, "you can't weaponize scripture on Monday and ignore it by Friday. Either it shapes your actions or it's just a costume." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kennedy's smile tightened. "I don't answer to Hollywood, sir. I answer to the people of Louisiana." Denzel leaned in. "Then I hope the people of Louisiana are reading more than your sound bites. Because quoting the Bible doesn't make you righteous. Living its message does." The moderator tried to interject, but no one was listening. Denzel wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His voice was clear, steady, each word sharper than the last. "You want to talk about faith? Let's start with Matthew 25 verse 35, I was hungry and you gave me food. Does cutting school lunch programs sound like living that verse to you?" Kennedy straightened. "I'm trying to balance budgets. And I'm trying to balance truth," Denzel said. "You can't preach love and legislate cruelty." At that moment, the tension became electricity. The chat thread exploded. Viewers tweeted in all caps. Clips were already being clipped. And this was just the first 5 minutes. Denzel didn't flinch. "You don't get to hide behind verses you don't live by. If you want to lead with faith, then lead with mercy. Lead with compassion. Lead like you believe in the God you keep quoting." Kennedy opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The moderator sat frozen. And the studio, for a few seconds, forgot to even breathe. The room hadn't settled since Denzel's words. Kennedy leaned slightly forward in his chair, his expression unreadable but his voice firm. "Mr. Washington," he said, adjusting his tie with exaggerated calm, "this nation was built on values. Scripture isn't a punchline, it's a foundation." Denzel didn't blink. "Then let's make sure we're not standing on a cracked one." A soft murmur moved through the crowd. The moderator froze, unsure whether to steer or let it ride. Kennedy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're an actor. A talented one. But sermons are better left to the pulpit. And policy to those who've earned it." Denzel leaned in. "See, that's the problem, Senator. You want to draw lines around who gets to speak, who gets to care. I may be an actor, but I'm also a father. A citizen. And when scripture is used to justify cruelty, silence isn't faith, it's fear." The audience tensed. A woman in the third row closed her notebook and just listened. Kennedy waved a dismissive hand. "So now quoting Corinthians is cruelty?" "No," Denzel said, low but direct. "Weaponizing it is. Cherry-picking verses to excuse neglect, that's not theology, that's theater." The phrase stung. Kennedy's eyes narrowed. "Don't lecture me on faith. I'm not, Denzel replied. I'm asking if it guides you when no one's looking. A beat passed. The studio air felt tight. Kennedy turned to the audience. He's turning this into a personal attack. No, I'm turning it into accountability, Denzel countered. You cite God in speeches, but gut social programs in votes. You praise family, but block policies that keep them together. Now even the moderator leaned in. Kennedy scoffed. This isn't Sunday school. Exactly, Denzel said. It's real life. And in real life, quoting scripture isn't leadership, it's camouflage unless you live by it. The line landed like a gavel strike. Several heads nodded. Candace Owens, seated offstage as part of the follow-up panel, shifted uncomfortably. She'd come prepared to spar with Denzel, but even she wasn't ready for this. The moderator finally stepped in. Let's refocus. But Kennedy cut him off. You think you're righteous? You're just loud. Denzel shook his head. And you think silence is strength? It's not. The camera cut to a wide shot. Two men, two philosophies. One calling for conviction. The other clinging to comfort. Backstage, a producer whispered, "This is going viral." And on social media, the clips were already climbing. Kennedy's southern charm was wearing thin. The rehearsed smile faded just enough for viewers to see the shift beneath it, irritation, even a flicker of panic. You know what's dangerous? Kennedy asked, his voice rising. Celebrities thinking they've earned a pulpit. You've got fans, Mr. Washington. I've got constituents. Denzel leaned back, unfazed. You've got a microphone, Senator. The question is, who are you really speaking for? The audience buzzed. Kennedy tried to regain footing. I speak for those who wake up every day, work hard, go to church, and follow the law. Folks who don't want to be lectured by elites. Elites? Denzel raised an eyebrow. Is that what you call people who ask questions? Because the Jesus I've read about, he questioned power. He flipped tables. He called out hypocrisy. That wasn't elitism. That was truth. Kennedy shook his head. You're twisting this. No, Denzel shot back, voice firm but controlled. I'm untwisting what's been wrapped in a flag and sold as gospel. The studio went still. Kennedy looked straight at the cameras now, bypassing Denzel. Let me tell the American people something. We've got enough division. We don't need Hollywood stoking flames. And yet, Denzel interrupted, it's your policies burning bridges. Kennedy snapped. You don't understand governance. I understand morality, Denzel fired back. And morality without action is just theater, something you seem far too comfortable performing. The moderator hesitated. This was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. Viewers at home were glued to their screens. Hashtags trended in real time. Hashtag Bible versus ballot, hashtag Denzel unleashed, hashtag Kennedy cornered. Denzel's tone softened slightly, but not his message. You preach peace, yet support policies that criminalize poverty. You talk family values, yet turn your back on single mothers. You say, God bless America, but forget, he said, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. Kennedy exhaled sharply. You don't know what it's like to sit in that Senate chamber. Denzel locked eyes with him. No. But I know what it's like to grow up in a country that lets men hide behind religion while children go hungry. That's not faith. That's fraud. The silence in the room now felt sacred. Not because it was peaceful, but because something had been exposed. And Kennedy, for once, had no verse left to quote. Kennedy finally leaned back, his hand tightening around the edge of the desk. The polished veneer of control was starting to crack. Mr. Washington, he said slowly, you act like belief must be perfect. It's not. It's human. Flawed. Denzel didn't move. Belief doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be honest. A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. Even the camera operator seemed to linger a moment longer than necessary on Kennedy's face. "I'm tired," Denzel continued, "of watching politicians cloak injustice in scripture. I'm tired of seeing compassion recited from a teleprompter, while real people suffer outside studio lights. You think quoting Psalms makes you a servant of the people?" Kennedy folded his arms. "It's better than quoting Twitter." The jab earned a few stiff laughs from the back rows. Denzel smiled, but it wasn't from amusement. "You think this is about fame? About sound bites? No, Senator. This is about what you claim to stand for. And what you're silent about when it counts." Kennedy straightened. "I've supported faith-based programs, prison reform." Denzel cut in. "And you've voted against healthcare expansion. Against raising the minimum wage. Against bills that would have fed kids in schools." Kennedy bristled. "Those programs are fiscally irresponsible." "No," Denzel said, firm. "What's irresponsible is cutting lifelines while quoting the Good Samaritan." Now even the moderator wasn't hiding his fascination. He leaned toward Denzel. "What do you say to those who feel you're politicizing faith?" Denzel turned to him calmly. "Faith is political when lives are on the line. The prophets weren't quiet. Jesus wasn't neutral. The Bible isn't a bedtime story, it's a call to action." Kennedy interjected, "You don't get to redefine scripture just because you have a platform. And you don't get to sanitize it to protect your seat," Denzel replied. It hit hard. The audience went completely still. The camera cut to Kennedy, who was visibly trying to compose himself. Then, with forced poise, Kennedy muttered, "You're not a pastor." "No," Denzel said, looking directly into the lens, "I'm a witness." At that, the crowd stirred, some nodding, some stunned, but none unmoved. The moderator sat frozen, eyes darting between the two men. The debate had left the script, and no one was reaching for the teleprompter. This was raw. Unfiltered. Something deeper than politics. Kennedy smoothed his jacket. "So what, Mr. Washington? You want the government to become a charity? Should we legislate compassion now?" Denzel didn't flinch. Compassion shouldn't need legislation. But when laws hurt the vulnerable, silence becomes complicity. The words hit hard. Kennedy's tone shifted. "You speak as if this country hasn't made progress. As if all we do is fail." Denzel raised his hand slightly, stopping him. "Progress isn't an excuse to stop pushing. You don't get to pat yourself on the back while others are still crawling." Somewhere off camera, someone audibly exhaled. Kennedy forced a laugh. "So what do you want from me? A confessional?" "I want honesty," Denzel replied, his voice low but resonant. "I want accountability. You stand on stages quoting Micah 6 verse 8, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly, but I don't see mercy in a man who defends cutting mental health services. I don't see humility in someone who uses the Bible like a badge but never carries its weight." Kennedy's nostrils flared. "You act like I haven't done a thing right." "That's not the point," Denzel replied, leaning forward. "The point is when you invoke sacred words, you better live sacred principles. Because if your policies contradict your scripture, then maybe it's not God you're following, just polls." Gasps. The moderator didn't even try to speak this time. Kennedy turned toward the audience, perhaps hoping for sympathy. "You want outrage. I want order." Denzel's reply came sharp, "You want comfort. I want change." A young viewer in the front row stood up, just for a second, and sat back down. Not out of protest, but resonance. Something was shifting. Kennedy's voice cracked slightly. "And if I don't agree with your version of change? Then you'd better stop quoting the same book that demands it," Denzel said. "Because scripture without justice is just decoration." A chill swept through the room. Not of fear, of clarity. Kennedy's voice dropped into a lower, nostalgic register. "You know, Mr. Washington, I grew up in a small town. We said grace before meals. We opened doors for strangers. We prayed before football games. That's the America I believe in. Denzel didn't mock it. He nodded once, but his reply came without pause. And while you prayed before games, did you ever wonder if the kid sitting alone at lunch had anything to eat after? The room went still again. Kennedy didn't answer. He glanced down, then back up. We looked out for each other. Some of us did, Denzel said. And some looked the other way. He continued, voice quiet but heavy. That version of America wasn't the same for everyone, Senator. You want to talk about values? Values aren't just what we say. They're who we include. And for decades, your policies have excluded more than they've embraced. Kennedy stiffened. I've fought for working families. Denzel raised a brow. But which ones? Now Kennedy sat up straighter. You're painting me as heartless. No, Denzel replied, I'm pointing out the gap between the verses you recite and the votes you cast. Murmurs again from the audience. The moderator leaned in, carefully. Senator Kennedy, what would you say to the people who feel abandoned by the system you help shape? Kennedy inhaled sharply. Government can't fix everything. Denzel responded instantly. Then stop pretending it's righteous when it refuses to try. The fire in the room returned. Kennedy tried to pivot. I believe in strong communities. Churches. Families. That's where healing begins. And I believe healing begins when leaders stop hiding behind stained glass and start walking into the fire, Denzel said. Faith isn't supposed to make us comfortable, it's supposed to make us courageous. This time, even the moderator didn't hide his nod. Kennedy looked rattled. Not because he had no words, but because every word felt exposed. Denzel let it breathe for a second, then added, you quote the Bible like it's armor. I carry it like it's a mirror. Another ripple through the crowd. Kennedy had no comeback. And the cameras, merciless in their honesty, caught it all. The silence after Denzel's last words wasn't awkward, it was necessary. Kennedy cleared his throat, trying to compose a rebuttal, but there was no applause to ride, no scripture left to wield like a shield. He finally spoke. Look, I never claimed to be perfect. But I love this country. And I believe in its moral compass. Denzel turned slightly in his chair. Then maybe it's time we ask who's holding that compass, and whether it's still pointing north. Kennedy tried a smile. So now you're the conscience of America? No, Denzel said simply. I'm just tired of watching leaders hide behind verses while children starve, while prisons overflow, while people sleep on sidewalks under billboards that say, God bless America. He paused, locking eyes with Kennedy. You think faith is proven in words? I think it's proven in choices. Kennedy shifted uncomfortably. Denzel leaned forward. Do you think Jesus would co-sign a budget that cuts meals for seniors but increases weapons funding? Do you think he'd celebrate tax breaks while mothers ration insulin? Kennedy's jaw tightened. That's not fair. What's not fair, Denzel said, voice rising just slightly, is using the Bible like a brand while ignoring its burden. The moderator interjected, Senator, is there a verse that defines your public service? Kennedy didn't hesitate. 2 Chronicles 7 verse 14, if my people will humble themselves and pray, I will heal their land. Denzel exhaled sharply, then said, and yet, Senator, when the land cries out, where's the healing? The audience stirred again. Humility, Denzel continued, isn't silence in the face of suffering. It's showing up. It's action. The prophets didn't wait for polling data to speak. They stood in the mess. They named injustice. Loudly. Kennedy glanced at his notes, a move that felt small in contrast. You want to lead with faith? Denzel said. Then lead with courage. Lead with sacrifice. Lead like people's lives depend on it, because they do. And then, softer, almost a whisper, you don't get to quote the Bible, if you've never wept with the people it was written for. There was no applause. Just a collective stillness. Even Kennedy, for a second, looked like he wasn't sure how to breathe. Kennedy's face remained frozen, not from anger, but from realization. He hadn't expected this kind of confrontation. Not from an actor. Not this precise, not this principled. And certainly not this public. The moderator looked toward Denzel, as if to invite closure. But Denzel wasn't finished. He stood up. And with that, the entire energy in the studio shifted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I'm not here to embarrass you, Senator," Denzel began, addressing Kennedy directly. "I'm here because millions of people don't have the privilege of this stage. Because when a child's dinner is a question mark, when a veteran sleeps on a park bench, when a mother buries her son because healthcare came too late, those aren't political failures. Those are moral ones." Kennedy stayed seated. His eyes followed Denzel, but his mouth remained closed. "You sit here quoting verses," Denzel continued, "but I grew up in pews where those verses meant something. They weren't weapons. They were promises. And the people who carried them weren't rich. They weren't powerful. But they had something more sacred than approval, they had integrity." The crowd didn't clap. They listened. "Faith without works is dead," Denzel said, quoting James 2 verse 17. "And yet how many in power offer words with no action? Thoughts with no change? Prayers with no policy?" He turned slowly to face the camera. "If you're going to wear the Bible like armor, then don't flinch when it's held up like a mirror." A producer backstage whispered, "We're witnessing something historic." Denzel continued, his tone solemn now. "I'm not a senator. I'm not a theologian. I'm a man who believes that if you invoke God's name, you better carry his compassion. And if you don't, then step aside." Kennedy finally spoke, his voice barely above a breath. "You're grandstanding." Denzel looked at him, not with scorn, but with something heavier. "No," he said. "I'm grieving." And with that, he sat back down. But the air didn't. It hung there, thick, unresolved, alive. The silence had weight now. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that made people shift in their seats because the truth was too close. Senator Kennedy broke eye contact. His fingers laced together on the desk, knuckles pale. He wasn't used to this kind of theater, one where applause didn't come on cue, and the lights didn't flatter the speaker. "Mr. Washington," he began, his voice slower, less certain, "you say you're grieving. But I think you're angry." Denzel didn't blink. "I am." Kennedy nodded slightly. "And you think that makes you right?" "No," Denzel replied. "It just means I still feel something. I haven't grown numb to the suffering of others. That used to mean something in this country." Kennedy looked up again. "You think I don't feel?" "I think you've learned how to suppress it," Denzel said. "Because feeling leads to action, and action upsets comfort." There it was. The crowd, still mostly silent, had begun to lean in. Literally. They weren't just watching anymore. They were witnessing. Kennedy looked down for a moment, then said, "You assume I haven't sacrificed." "I don't assume anything," Denzel said softly. "But I've never seen you risk political safety to do what's morally right. I've seen you play to the base. Quote scripture. Smile through budget cuts." Kennedy's lips parted, but nothing came out. Denzel turned slightly, addressing not just him but everyone. "You know what real faith looks like?" he asked. "It's Moses walking back into Egypt, the place he fled. It's Esther risking her crown. It's Jesus flipping tables in a temple and knowing full well what it would cost." He let that hang. "And you?" he said to Kennedy. "You won't even risk a bad headline." Kennedy inhaled, ready to defend himself, but this wasn't the moment for debate. Because Denzel wasn't attacking him anymore. He was challenging everyone watching. "Somewhere out there," Denzel said, "a kid is going to sleep hungry. A mother is praying her child doesn't get sick. A veteran is wondering if he mattered after the war ended. And they're not tuning in to see who wins this exchange. They're hoping someone, anyone, we'll finally stop performing and start doing. The moderator looked stunned. Even the crew had gone still. Kennedy whispered, "You've turned this into a sermon." "No," Denzel answered. "I've turned it into a mirror. And I'm just asking you to look." Kennedy sat perfectly still. His silence was no longer defensive, it was reflective. Maybe for the first time in the entire debate, he wasn't reaching for a response. He was reckoning with one. The moderator leaned in cautiously. "Senator, final thoughts?" Kennedy looked at the floor. Then at Denzel. Then, slowly, into the camera. "I've quoted a lot of verses," he said, voice low. "But tonight I was forced to ask if I've lived them." He paused. "I came here to defend my record. But maybe what needs defending is my heart." A ripple of surprise moved through the studio. Denzel didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just listened, the way a man listens when the noise finally dies and something real emerges. Kennedy continued. "I don't agree with everything Mr. Washington said. But he reminded me of something I forgot. Faith without discomfort isn't faith, it's branding." The moderator blinked. "Are you saying you were wrong?" Kennedy sighed. "I'm saying I have more praying to do. And not just with my lips." A few in the audience clapped, hesitant but sincere. Denzel finally spoke. "That's all anyone's asking, Senator. Not perfection. Just alignment." Kennedy offered a nod, not of concession, but of understanding. The moderator stood. "Well, that concludes our segment." As the cameras pulled back, the lights dimmed slightly, and the illusion of polished television began to fade into something more human. Denzel extended his hand. Kennedy shook it. No applause cue. No dramatic score. Just two men, one weathered by politics, the other anchored by purpose, locked in a moment neither expected. Backstage, a young producer whispered to another, "This wasn't a debate." "No," the other replied. "It was a reckoning." And for the millions watching, some in silence, some in tears, it felt like, just maybe, the truth had gotten the last word. What started as a political clash ended as something deeper, a mirror. In a world loud with rhetoric, Denzel asked a simple question, and silence answered. If this moment moved you, drop a comment below. Do we quote what we don't live? Do we still have room for truth, spoken softly, but landing hard? Subscribe to CB Stories, because real power isn't in the volume, but in the clarity. See you in the next one.